You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. And it's my pleasure to tell you all that 3CR is here for the long run. It's been here, I think, 48 years, and it'll be here for another 48 years. I won't be here, but I'm sure a few of our listeners will be around, because obviously we must have one listener under the age of 20. Now, if you wonder what anarchy is all about, anarchos without rules, without rulers, not without rules, without rulers. What gives the rulers of the world, the potential rulers of the world, the Trumps, the Xi Jinpings, the Putins of the world, the ability to determine the lives of billions of people, inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggle is the struggle to devolve power, that's share power through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Nothing radical about that. Maybe the paths we take to achieve that have got a radical tinge to them, but as far as the concepts they're concerned, there are concepts that people have been struggling for and dying for, been imprisoned for and tortured for thousands of years. Empires come and go, but the struggle to create an egalitarian community continues ad nauseum. Right. I'm interested, look, a bit hard today. I've been thinking about what to talk about, because obviously we tend to analyse what's happening, but sometimes you want to go a bit further than that, because what's the point of analysing if it's the same thing happens over and over and over and over again? Now, I'm interested in why we are seeing the rise and rise and rise of the authoritarian ruler, whether they're self-appointed like Xi Jinping or whether they're elected like Mr. Biden and possibly Mr. Trump in a few months' time. Why? Why are we seeing more and more people moving to isolationist type of politics where the other, the person who speaks a different language, different culture, different religion is the problem, not the fact that we have an increasingly unequal society in terms of power and wealth? So I'm very interested why the fascist beast has been unlocked from the cage it's been contained in over the last 40 to 50 years. The door is wide open, and wherever you look in the world, whether it's the US of A, whether it's France, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, and the list goes on and on, the fascist beast is snarling. And it's snarling everywhere, including this country. So why have we come to this position? What has occurred in the world and in this country over the last 40 to 50 years which has created the social, cultural and political conditions which have allowed the fascist beast to be released, from its cage? Well, it's very simple. We've gone through a period of history where we have seen the greatest transfer of wealth from those who survive on a day-to-day basis to those who acquire wealth. The greatest transfer of history since the enclosure movement in the 18th and 19th century in England, where 6 million acres of common land within a few decades became private land. And then we saw the rise of capitalism. So what is it? What's happened in the last 40 to 50 years which have made so many people around the world so dissatisfied with the situation they find themselves in that they're happy to flirt with the fascist beast? Because in many people's mind, the only solution open to them is to embrace the fascist beast. It's no accident that the Nazi political program was one of National Socialism. No accident whatsoever. So what is it? Well, we speak about this ad nauseum, and I don't believe, but I know. All right, let's take a big step forward. Let's say I know that the main reason we see so many people embracing the Le Pens of the world, the Xi Jinpings of the world, the Trumps and the Bidens of the world, the Putins of the world, is because of the increasing centralisation of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And if you look at the periods in human history where the greatest atrocities have occurred, especially in the last 2 to 3 centuries, they have occurred when power is centralised in an individual or a small clique that controls the state apparatus and uses that state apparatus to maintain its power. And obviously, struggles across centuries have been struggles about breaking down that power, destroying the royal prerogative. So what is it that has driven us to this stage in our development as a race, as a human race, the human race? What has brought us to this period where once again, over 100 years after the Great Wars, we are embracing the fascist beast? You may not be embracing the fascist beast, but the majority of people around the world are embracing the fascist beast, believing some type of authoritarian, centralised, supreme ruler is somehow going to solve the problems that we face as a species on planet Earth. Well, let's go through it. I know you may be a bit bored, but politics is about repetition, privatisation. What has privatisation achieved in this country? What did privatisation achieve in Eastern Europe and Russia with the collapse of the old communists? What did privatisation achieve in Western Europe? What has privatisation achieved in South America and the US of A? Because everywhere we have looked over the past 40 to 50 years, we have seen institutions, service providers, which have been built up for the blood, sweat and tears of taxpayers across the world, been been given away at bargain basement prices at fire sales to the private sector. And what has privatisation done? The first thing it's done in Western parliamentary democracies, it's removed competition from these democracies, these parliamentary, I won't use the word democracy for them, but these parliamentary democracies, these representative democracies. What has privatisation done? It's increased prices, it's centralised power, it has removed a source of income for populations because many institutions which have been privatised were profit-making institutions. So privatisation has been at the cornerstone of a transfer of wealth from the mass of people to a fewer and fewer individuals and corporations. We see this around the world. And what that means is that the financial security, or even the security that people had because they were citizens or residents of a particular sovereign nation state, has dissolved. So insecurity, especially financial insecurity, has become part and parcel of everyday life in almost every sovereign nation state where privatisation has been at the forefront of political change. Then what's the next step? What's the next step that's driven people into the arms of the fascist beast? What's the next step which has allowed people to find the key which had been, set under concrete, chip away at the concrete, grab the key, open the cage to the fascist beast? Deregulation. Now, obviously, bureaucracy is an issue. But deregulation is more than an attack on bureaucracy. Deregulation has been an attack on all the laws and institutions and organisations and government bodies which have been set up through struggle to protect people, to protect working people, to protect the environment from a system which is based on the private investment for private profit mantra, a system which is based on exploitation, a system which is based on manufactured need to increasing profits irrespective of the human, social, environmental, cultural costs. So we've seen government after government allow corporate capitalism to grow, to increase its wealth. And nothing highlights this more than the statistic which I repeat every bloody week. 40 years ago, if you're an investor who invested $1 in a successful business, a third of the profits made by that business would return to you and 2/3 would return to the workers who created that profit. Today, it's been reversed. Totally reversed, turned on its head. For every dollar that a private investor invests, every dollar a private investor invests, 2/3 return to the investor, 1/3 returns to the worker. And how do private corporations, whether it's in the financial sector, the banking sector, the agricultural sector, the list goes on and on, how do they make a buck? They make a buck by 1, exploiting their workers, and 2, exploiting the people who require their services. So deregulation has not improved people's situation. The fact that essential services are now run by private organisations, even essential services like early childhood development, aged care, let alone energy, are now owned and run and manipulated by private organisations whose major responsibility is to create ever-increasing profits for their major shareholders, has made people's life worse. So if you're a voter and you live in a parliamentary democracy, well, obviously, if your personal situation highlights the fact that maybe things you don't understand in terms of how the economy is run, but if your personal situation has deteriorated, well, then you'll be looking for alternatives. And those on the left, those who call themselves progressive, have been left far behind because their activities revolve around personality politics. Their activities revolve around the individual rights. We have forgotten that it's collective effort and our collectivism and our collective actions which has created that standard of living which has now disappeared. So privatisation, deregulation. What's the next little nail in the coffin of creating an egalitarian community, of creating a decentralised community? Corporatisation. Now, I notice our friends in the Liberal National Party, as well as our friends in the Greens Party, are pushing the idea of having a demutualisation agenda as far as the grocery corporations are concerned. Not as far as the mining sector is concerned, not as far as other sectors is concerned, but the fact is that we have ensured through ideological manipulation to allow corporations to become bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful to the point where they're not able to fail. We saw this during the global financial crisis where they pulled money out of the air. So when you have an economy which is dominated by corporations, and all you've got to do is walk into any major shopping complex anywhere in this country, and you'll see the same brands flashing at you, asking you to put your money into their hands and buy their crap. Whether it's Darwin, whether it's Perth, Adelaide, Goulburn, Melbourne, Shepparton, you name it. Anywhere in this country. Brisbane. Not Udnadatta, obviously. It's not big enough, is it? Yes. So corporatisation. Huge issue. Now, we have small businesses around this country failing every day. And most small business people think it's about government regulation. Well, the fact that small business does not flourish in this country, that 90% of small businesses close within 5 years of opening, and many people with the hope of having some type of independent income, 3 of government and the corporate sector fail miserably because the economic power that corporations are able to exercise on every aspect of our living, from what we buy to how we die and how we're cremated or buried. Even the funeral industry has become corporatised. And those independent sectors of any industry find it much more difficult to compete, especially in this country where, as I said before, there are no antitrust laws. And last but not least, we have globalisation. And what's globalisation? You know what globalisation is. When you export jobs. You export jobs overseas to sovereign nation states which have no protection for their workforces. And you see the effect globalisation has on this country and around the world. Forget about global trade. We've always had global trade. The difference is we don't have global trade in terms of goods and services. We now have global trade in terms of human beings. So, no wonder people are fumbling around for an alternative. And if there are organised political movements and parties around the world which are offering an alternative to the failed parliamentary democratic system which has been usurped by that small section of society that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, which ultimately determines parliamentary policy and the type of legislation which goes through Parliament, where we see a handful of corporations and private individuals dominating mineral extraction and exports from this country and making exceptional profits for their shareholders, we begin to understand why people are turning to alternatives which somehow offer a simple solution. Get rid of the people with the funny hats. Get rid of the people who've got a different religious perspective. It's been tried before. Get rid of the people who've got 6 toes, you know. Get rid of the other. And somehow your life's going to change. Well, your life's not going to change by exploiting the exploited. Life changes when we are able to acquire power, the power that individuals and corporations exercise over each and every one of us, the power where the commonwealth is real commonwealth, not the exclusive domain of a shrinking number of corporations which determine parliamentary politics. So no wonder people have unlocked the fascist beast, forgetting the lessons of history. Now, a few days ago, I was sent a little statement. And I usually don't read stuff on this program, but I thought this little statement actually encapsulates the situation we find ourselves in 2024, when we have no understanding of where we come from, why we find ourselves in this particular situation where we worship, at the foot of Mammon, where we worship privatisation and deregulation and corporatisation and globalisation, because we've forgotten our own history. Now, in the Melbourne Age, there's a little advertisement on page 43 on Saturday the 26th of the 6/24 in the Deaf Notice column. That's right. I want to read it out because I think it encapsulates a lot of things that we've been talking about. Simpson, Lynette, brackets, Latham, 6/5/1938 to 5/6/2024. So obviously this individual had been on the planet for a good length of time. This was written by Lynn. That's Lynette Simpson in March 2024. To be ignorant of what happened before you were born is to remain forever a child. Greatness requires deep historical knowledge, according to Cicero. You cannot be insightful or persuasive if you don't have the ability to make comparisons to past events and eras. Lack of a broad historical perspective produces a moral shallowness, a narrowness of purpose, and a crippling inability to inspire. Worst of all, it leaves you poorly equipped to respond to change. thus Cicero tells us, is the power of history. Think about it. And that's what we are today. A society that lives in the moment, that thinks in the moment, that responds at a gut level, which raises all our prejudices as we respond in a manner which doesn't acknowledge where we come from. And nothing highlights this more than the Australian experience, a country which was built on three principles: genocide, three land, and three labour. Who couldn't make a profit? Who couldn't make a profit if that was given to you on a plate? Well, obviously, you and I need to make change. Everybody else talks about working up the right channels or a mythical revolution that will come sometime in the future. Others are fighting to unlock the beast and cheer as the beast leaves its cage, thinking that somehow the beast is going to look after them. A beast is a beast is a beast. Others try to form alternatives, do the best they can. I encourage you to look at public interest before corporate interests. Look at their website, PIBC, public interest before corporate interest. I'm a registered officer of that particular organisation. Public interest before corporate interest encapsulates many, not all, of the ideas which are, shared with you on this program. So, make sense of the world. Know your past, know your present. As people say, to understand the present, you need to acknowledge the past. And to change the future, you need to acknowledge the past and understand the present. You're listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489. You can go to the Public Interest Before Corporate Interest website, pibci.net. You can look at the Anarchist Media Institute website, Facebook page, Joseph Toscano, YouTube channel, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. It just goes on and on. But ultimately, you can listen to as many people as you like. But ultimately, nothing changes. History tells us nothing changes until people take a stand. Maybe individually at first, but ultimately collectively. Where the majority make decisions that improve the lives of the many. We've been walking down the wrong road for so long, hoping, praying, the Bidens, the Trumps, the Xi Jinpings, the Putins, and the list goes, the Le Pens of the world will somehow be able to tame the beast and create nirvana for all of us. What a delusional fantasy. Let's move on. Public housing, everybody's business. I'm going to go through this again. As I said before, we have this debate every day. It's very cold today. Well, it's very cold in Melbourne. I assume it's cold for our listeners in Tasmania. I don't know about the rest of the country. I assume it's a bit warmer as you go further north. That's the way life is. Now, everybody talks about the housing crisis. Everybody, well, 99.9% of people talk about the private solution to the housing crisis. A private solution which is involved on increasing investment by the private sector in the housing sector. A private solution involved in giving people taxation advantages like negative gearing in order to invest money in the housing sector. And we see rents increase, we see more interest rates increase, we see mortgages increase. Now, I'm going to go through this once again. It's so deadly simple. It's a little bit like saying the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, all right? 1, public housing is government-owned and government-managed. That's the traditional idea of public housing. Affordable housing, community housing, social housing, inclusive housing, which is the terminology which has now overtaken the public housing debate, is ultimately privately owned and privately managed. Now, obviously, some of the organisations involved in this, not-for-profit organisations, but ultimately they are privately owned organisations. Now, what we've seen, especially in the state of Victoria, which I'm very familiar with, as that's where I live, is that public housing has been privatised over the last 2 decades. And we now have this fantasy, this government fantasy, they're going to knock down 45 towers and replace them with a public-private partnership, which supposedly will increase housing stock. That's the fantasy. Now, what is positive about public housing? Now, obviously, any public institution which is underfunded is going to have problems. And the Victorian state government has, over the last 2 decades, underfunded and refused to carry out repairs on public housing in a significant number of cases in order to create the social and cultural conditions which allow them to privatise what they consider to be an eyesore. Public housing, especially spot purchasing public housing, provides security. The thing about owning your own home is the security of knowing that you can't be kicked out. The security of knowing that your kids can go to the same schools, the same sporting clubs, and have a variety of friends. Private housing, whether it's rental, let's not forget almost 40% of Australians are now forced to rent because of the lack of public housing. Private housing is essentially insecure housing. It has extraordinary impacts on children because it means they may have to move from school to school. It means they may not be able to go to the same sporting clubs. It means that it has a direct impact on their development as human beings, as residents, as citizens of this country. That's why public housing is everybody's business. Now, in Victoria, there's a thing called stamp duty on housing. If you buy a house, you pay a significant amount of stamp duty. And anywhere between $5 to $8 billion is collected from stamp duty by the Victorian state governments and state governments around the country, except New South Wales, which has changed its model. And that money is placed into consolidated revenue. You would think a tax that is placed on private housing should be used to create public housing. You could house 100,000 Victorians every year, 1 million within a decade, in secure public housing, which does not have to be multi-storey towers. They can be spot purchased around the community, regional centres, country centres, cities, Melbourne. So what does public housing do? And I'm going to use capitalist principles here. Private investment for private principles, right? Now, capitalism is all about competition. You and I know there's no competition because of corporatisation. Now, when you have a sector of the economy which is dominated by a particular group of people, when you've got that section of the economy that is dominated by a particular group of people, what does that mean? It means they have a monopoly. Now, the private sector has a monopoly on housing in this country. It has a monopoly on housing in this country. So what happens if you increase public housing stock? One, as you increase public housing stock, you increase competition between the private housing sector and the public housing sector. As you increase competition and more people enter the public housing sector, the need to rent privately decreases. The need to rent privately decreases. Investors flee the market and move into the stock market. As they flee the market, housing prices drop. As the need for private rental decreases, private rental drops. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. It's a win-win situation for the community because a stable, secure environment decreases criminal activity, antisocial behaviour. It's a win-win for everybody. If rents are fixed to 25% of income, what that means is there's more money, disposable money, that goes into the economy, which stimulates the economy and possibly even stimulates the small business sector, which needs that economic stimulation because there's more disposable income. As public housing stocks increase and rents decrease, more people will be able to enter the private housing market because housing prices at the lower end of the market will fall. So that's why public housing is everybody's business. Public housing is everybody's business for that particular reason. Public housing, you know, it's such a logical solution to the situation we find ourselves in. Now, when the Andrews Labor government was elected many, many years ago, they had an option. They could dig holes in the ground or they could invest money in public housing. So what did they do? They privatised public housing and continue to dig holes in the ground, causing more and more economic dislocation. Let's move on. Yep, I did speak about the limits of identity politics when we first started, because obviously it has a limit. It's about power. It's about wealth. You know, that's what it's about. Let's move on. Gaza. Now, let's not forget, Gaza is the size, about half the size of Melbourne. It's about the size of Canberra. Not a big area. I'm not calling it the ACT, but just Canberra. Not a big area. And over the last 8 months, we've had about 40,000 people now killed. People call it a war. It's not a war, it's carnage. You've got a superpower, which is the Israeli state, which has nuclear armaments and is well armed by people around the world, including good old Australia, you know, where we have a lot of, investments. And 8 months later, the carnage continues. Not just about the direct impact on those that are killed. And as I keep saying, you go for a little walk. The walk is now 40 kilometres. It'll take you a little few hours. And every metre you'd see a man, woman or child, mainly women, children and elderly people, you know. A bit harder to kill militants. And we've had resolutions in the United Nations Security Council. We've had people jumping up and down. We've had poor Mr. Biden, the President of the USA, trying to rein in his mates in the Israeli government. We've even had the Israeli military kind of been on the verge of mutiny because of the stupidity of the action that continues to be taken and the risk it puts Israel in terms of a wider war. And the fact, when you look at it, there's only 9 million people in Israel, 5 million in Palestine. We're not talking about a huge number of people. The carnage continues. And what this highlights is the lack of interest and the lack of power in terms of the United Nations having an impact on a rogue state, unless that rogue state doesn't fit, isn't one of their allies. And if a rogue state is one of our allies, then they're allowed to do what they like. As I said before, it's not just the deaths and the 100,000 that have got permanent wounds and will carry them for the rest of their lives. It's the massive dislocation, the massive destruction of infrastructure. Over 75% of infrastructure in Gaza has now disappeared. It's the fact that millions of people are crowded in unsanitary situations. It's the fact that starvation looms for many people in Gaza. It's the fact that healthcare is almost non-existent, that surgeons are operating, doing amputations on children, with a torch. It's the fact there are no medicines. It's the fact there's no sanitation. And 8 months later, it continues on the myth that the destruction of Gaza somehow is going to create security for the Israeli state and the Israeli people, when it's the very opposite. History tells us when a group of people overreacts, their demise is part of that overreaction. So the carnage continues. But the fact is, there are more and more people who are saying enough is enough. And even in our little backwater, the backwater of Australia, we're seeing an ALP senator cross the floor, the first time in 40 years, to support the creation of a state of Palestine. We are seeing a Labor Party concerned about the electoral impact it will have in seats where there is support for the Palestinian struggle. We see an opposition which continues to mouth Israeli military propaganda as if it's gospel truth. So, and more importantly, what I've seen over the past few weeks is the fact that Gaza, the carnage that continues in Gaza, is no longer front page news. It no longer makes the television screen. It's beginning to disappear from social media. It's as if we've all accepted the fact that this carnage will continue indefinitely. Now, raising it here on the Anarchist World this week is really not going to do much, but why I raise it is because I think it's important that people listening to this program, listening to the podcast, understand that this particular horror, and this is the worst horror we've seen in the 21st century, this particular horror, which makes what's happening in the Ukraine, seem almost bearable, needs to be remembered and not forgotten, and needs to be uppermost in the thoughts of people in this country. Because we ultimately do have the ability to do things to, put the Israeli government on the back foot. Things like expelling the Israeli ambassador, things like cutting links with the Israeli military-industrial complex, which there are many links in this country, from the universities to our manufacturing sectors to our increasing armaments industry. Because about a decade ago, federal government made the decision that they wanted to increase this country's armaments industry. Okay, so I'm going to mention it every week, just to remind people, although it's not on the front pages, we may have this little shenanigan within the Labor Party on the front pages, but what's happening in Gaza may slip from the front pages, but it doesn't slip from our activities and what we do. Do you know what a royal prerogative is? Do you know what a royal prerogative is? You see, in the good old days, and now in the 21st century, you had a royal prerogative. A king or a queen, an emperor or an empress was above the law. Above the law of the land. Because they were appointed by God. Poor old God gets all the blame for everything that's terrible that we do on earth, when the reality is it's not God that does it. It's we do it to each other. That's the irony of it all, the irony of religion. So God gets the blame. So the royal prerogative says, I'm king, I'm queen, get fucked. I'm above the law. I don't care. God put me in this position. I'll do what I like. Well, the US Supreme Court seems to agree. Their recent decision to highlight the fact that a United States president, while president and doing presidential things, can basically do what they like and they're above the law. What a joke. Here we have the land of the brave and the free. Mainly the three to kill each other. The land of the brave and the free, welcoming another Napoleon. Well, not intellectually, but, physically. The fact is that the clock's been... The revolutionaries of 1776 would be spinning, not turning, spinning in their graves. Fancy having somebody with a royal prerogative as President of the United States of America. What can I say for all those long-suffering US citizens who have seen their political system, their culture, turned on its head? A royal prerogative. Wonderful. Well, what that means is I don't like this person because they're a potential threat. Could you please go out and jail them, or maybe shoot them, or maybe hang, draw and quarter them? Because I've got the royal prerogative. The United States Supreme Court seems to be the new god on the block. As you know, there are many gods on the block. It's difficult to know which god to worship. Well, for a simple human being like me, it's difficult. Obviously, many other people don't have the same problem. So what God do we need? So the US Supreme Court has now become God incarnate in the US of A. And the problem is, when they become God incarnate in the US of A, what that means is, as we saw of Mr. Julian Assange, who spent, lost 14 years of his life telling the truth because he told the truth, what we see is the tentacles of the new God, the US Supreme Court, now encompass the 8 billion people on planet Earth, and possibly in the near future on the Moon and Mars. You're listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. What can you do? What can you do when things are so illogical? And as I said before, the door's been unlocked. The beast will look after us. Urban devastation. Now, we seem to have forgotten one, the elephant in the room. Well, maybe the dinosaur, the pterosaurus, what is it? Oh, Rexy, not the dog, Tyrannosaurus Rex in the room. We've seemed to have forgotten the dinosaur in the room. The climate emergency, global warming, whatever you want to call it, climate change, everywhere we are seeing signs of the fact that we are as a species, we've created the very conditions which may lead to our pauperisation and maybe even extinction. I'm not talking about the probability of nuclear war, which is always on the cards. As the strong men, tussle for supremacy, whether it's Xi Jinping, whether it's Putin, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, you name them, our friend in North Korea, that little dictator, that little rocket boy. The fact is that as 70% of the world's population now lives in major urban metropolises, some with a population of more than the whole number of people in this country, like Mexico City, with 30 million people, like Cairo, which has absorbed 3 million Sudanese from the civil war, which is happening in Sudan as I speak, absorbed in the last 3 to 4 years. Could you imagine if we were asked to absorb 3 million refugees in this country? I'm sure there'd be machine gun posts on every beach in the country. But the future is grim. And it's even grimmer when we have the potential government in waiting, the Dutton-led Liberal National Party, claiming initially that didn't exist and now claiming that we need to continue extraction of fossil fuels in order to make a buck for privately owned corporations. What a silly state of affairs. I mean, if you told me when I was involved in radical activities in the late 1960s and early 1970s, if you told me that 60 years later, or is it 50 years later, I've forgotten, 55 years later, that I would be in this situation, looking at all the issues we looked at today, I would laugh. But unfortunately, as a society, we've gone backwards because, you see, today, truth is no longer the only casualty of love and war. It's a 21st century hookworm infestation. Those of you who know about hookworm, it eventually kills you. You see, truth is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. When you have a centralised system of government, when you put your faith in a leader who basically rules because of a so-called royal prerogative, whether it's a dictatorship or a parliamentary democracy, you put yourself in an exceptionally difficult situation. Because the fantasies, illusions, delusions which run around their heads become issues for the people they rule. Look at what happened in Nazi Germany. Look at what happened in Pol Pot's Cambodia. Look at what happened in good old Russia when Stalin, found himself in a position of authority. Look at the Bush legacy, the coalition of the willing. The Howard legacy in this country. Look at all those legacies. Look at all their delusions, their fantasies. The fact is, truth is no longer relevant. Facts don't matter. Figures don't matter. All that matters, like the good old days, before people revolted, before people demanded reforms to improve their situation. The fact is, it's an illusion. Because facts and figures are no longer relevant. If we can't accept that the climate emergency is a reality, if we can't accept that what's happening in Gaza is totally beyond the pale, if we can't accept that the privatisation, deregulation, corporatisation, globalisation, little marathon we've been running for the last 40 to 50 years was a mistake, then we don't have very much to look forward to. And that's why I keep saying the individual is important. Ideas start somewhere, and historically, when you look at your history, it may be a few people initially, but in time, reality bites. Facts and figures are important. Fantasy is irrelevant. Delusional behaviour is deadly. You've been listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming on 3cr.org.au. The program is broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. Encourage you to look at the YouTube channel, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. If you're interested in Australian history, especially how Australia was used as a political gulag, the Guantanamo Bay of the British Empire, and then I encourage you to look at the website josephtoscano.nam, where I look at groups of political prisoners which were transported here during the 19th century and what it actually means for Australia today. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489. If you're interested in joining Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, go to their webpage, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, pibci.net, and you can actually join online. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. That's 3cr.org.au. And unlike many other people in the world today, I still love to receive letters. So if you make the effort of putting it on paper, posting it to Post Office Box 20 Parkville, I'll do my best to answer it. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World this week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
We know you love listening to 3CR, but we also know that many of you haven't downloaded the Community Radio Plus app yet.
The app lets you tune in anywhere and share the station with your friends.
So, show the love and share the love and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.